Welcome, everyone. We have a special presentation for you today with Elaine Nordlie. Elaine was born in Lanesboro, Minnesota, into a family with Norwegian ancestors, most of whom emigrated from Telemark, Norway. She was the fifth generation born in America and the first generation to speak English as a child. However, she did learn Norwegian when she was a student at Oslo Teachers College in 1967 and 68. She met her future husband there at Oslo Teachers College in folk art dances. They later lived in Norway for 14 years. In 1983, Elaine and Kjell and their daughters immigrated to America because of their youngest daughter's serious heart problems. They settled in Dassel, Minnesota, where she has lived for the last 40 years. She's been a curious cat since she was a child. Fascination with genealogy eventually led her to join Telelaget, which is a cultural organization with members who have ancestry in Telemark. She's been active on the Telelaget board for the last 32 years. At present, she helps members with translations, has guided 5 tour groups to Norway for Telelaget, and submits articles for their publication, Telesoga. In 2015, the editor of Telesoga asked if she would consider translating some special stories called Glenwood Tales from a 1919 issue of Telesoga. She became very curious about the artist who had made the drawings that accompany the stories, and that was the beginning of her journey with artist Herbjørn Gausta. Elaine, we're so pleased that you could tell us a little bit about Herbjørn and his cartoons today.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me, Loran and Vesterheim. It's an honor, actually, to be here and doing this in memory of Herbjørn Gausta. Now, many of you maybe are familiar with this Norwegian painter, Herbjørn Gausta. He painted approximately 400 altar paintings, plus numerous landscapes and portraits. So I'm honored today to share with you what I learned about Herbjørn Gausta's less known art, his sketches and caricatures. First, I think I would like to share some information about Herbjørn Gausta's life. He was born June 16th, 1854, in rural Tinn, Telemark, Norway. The Gausta farm lies in Vestfjorddalen, and here we will see the map of Norway so you can see where the valley is and where Telemark is located. Telemark is in southern Norway, and the valley in which he lived was a valley running, you can see Rjukan here on the screen, where the heavy water sabotage was during World War II. But the Gausta farm is running up the Vestfjorddalen, the West Fjord Valley, up to the right, so north and east. Now, this valley had a spectacular view of the Gaustatoppen, the Mount Gausta, the tallest mountain in Telemark. That was their view from their farm. A past president of Telelaget, J.N. Jacobson, spoke about Gausta with these words: "The impressions of beauty, which in Norway had placed a stamp upon his youthful mind, were never erased." And I can understand that. If you had a view like this for your whole youth and upbringing, you would not forget it. It's beautiful. Although in 1867, the Gausta family decided to leave this beautiful place. The family of 7, which included the parents, 3 older sisters, and Herbjørn, who was 13 years old, left their extended families and immigrated from Telemark. Here you see the Gausta farm, and this picture was taken in the late 1800s. You see here the stabur, some of the people on the farm and their animals. That is not the Gaustatoppen in the background, by the way. And now the house as it is looking at this time has been, of course, remodeled. There's an addition on the front of the house, but this would have been the home where Herbjørn Gausta grew up. So they left this beautiful place and settled in what is now known as Harmony, Minnesota. Although when they arrived, it was called the Greenfield Prairie, not Harmony. Family memoirs mention that whenever the opportunity came, Herbjørn would draw cartoons and sketch scenery, comics, people, animals, birds, and whatever crossed his path. He was interested in drawing from the time he was just a child. 2 years after settling on their farm in Harmony, Father Nils died at the age of 60. Herbjørn, being the only son, became now the head of the household. Herbjørn toiled for 3 years on the farm, and he also took other outside jobs, but that really was not his calling. So in 1872, at the age of 18, Herbjørn left the farm with support from his family and entered a 3-year parochial teacher training program at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa. His mother operated the farm while the daughters took outside jobs, but they were constantly short of money. During Herbjørn's stay at Luther College, he went without a winter coat and overshoes, and that was noticed by his other fellow students. But it was here at Luther College that his art was taken seriously. His classmates and teachers saw his exceptional talent. Reverend J.V. Koren, an influential Lutheran minister, and many of you maybe have heard of Koren and all that he has done. If you haven't, please Google Koren. He made art training a reality for Herbjørn. Reverend Koren understood the financial hardships of the Gausta family, so he solicited the communities in Northeast Iowa for funds. Here we see a couple that has helped him and has given funds to his financial support, the Einung family from Telemark. The Einung family is also in that same valley that Herbjørn grew up in. So with financial support from these people, they were able to raise a total of $100. And Herbjørn left for Christiania, which is now Oslo, in 1875 for a 2-year study at Knut Berglien's art school in Oslo. Most of his benefactors were from Decorah and Harmony, and he gifted them later with paintings, as you see here. These two have supported him, and they have received their paintings, portraits. After 2 years in Norway, his funds, of course, were depleted, but he really wished to study art in Munich at the Academy of Art. Fellow students of his in Oslo were also moving to the area of Munich to study art. His official papers from the Academy refer to him as from, not Minnesota, but from Telemark. While he was there in Munich at the art school, he won the Academy Medal, the highest award given to a student in his class. He had the good fortune while he was there of meeting Isabel E. Singer, who commissioned him to make copies of 3 museum pieces. Although money would be a concern throughout his life, this really marks the beginning of him getting self-supporting himself. Between his studies, he would often return to his family in Telemark. Couldn't get Telemark out of his mind. In 1881, Gausta returned to America, and during the first 5 years, he lived in various U.S. cities. During 1886 to 1887, he taught art at Luther College, and he resided with the Koren family here in this parsonage at Washington Prairie. He had a room on 2nd floor where he drew on the white plaster walls. Many years later, in 1941, during remodeling of the parsonage, the parishioners discovered more than 20 charcoal sketches under layers of wallpaper. The room has been preserved as it would have looked during Gausta's stay, which is a great testimony to Decorah's appreciation of Gausta's art. After a year of teaching at Luther College, he traveled again to Telemark, where he drew sketches while visiting relatives. In the fall, he traveled to Munich, and later to the Isle of Capri in Italy. The following spring and summer months of 1888, he was back in Telemark again. But in the fall of that year, Gausta finally settled. He settled in Minneapolis. He established a studio on the 3rd floor of the Minneapolis Tribune building. Here we see him in his studio, and you can see all the landscapes that are on the walls, and I think he is doing a painting there with a lake scene. But suddenly, within a year, the Tribune building burned to the ground, along with paintings of artist friends and all of his works. All that Gausta had left was the clothes on his back. Few people could support an artist doing original paintings. His paintings were praised at many art exhibits, but there were few buyers. These circumstances were difficult, and although Gausta never considered another vocation, he had to explore another art avenue to earn a living. And that is when he began producing altar paintings for churches. So a total of about 400 paintings were produced by his hand. Here we see one of his paintings, altar paintings, Emmaus, Road to Emmaus, and above is a scene here from Minnesota, one of his landscapes that has survived. Gausta traveled to Europe again in 1894 and 1899, which were his last overseas trips. Back in Minneapolis, he taught at the University of Minnesota. From the early 1900s, he boarded with A.H. Korn family in Minneapolis and then had a studio in the Lutheran Publishing House. Mrs. Korn spoke to Marion Nelson about Gausta's love of music, which is also very interesting. She says, his knowledge of music was so extensive that when he heard a piece played on an instrument at a distance or on one of the old gramophones, he knew its title and he knew the name of the composer. So it's interesting to learn that he was not just artistically talented in visual art, but musical art also. He never married, but through the years, he kept close ties to his family in harmony. His way of life is described as simple and his manner as humble and kind. He really enjoyed the company of a few close friends. One of his close friends was Torkel Ofdeli, the founding editor of the Telesoga. Here we see a picture of Torkel in later years. Torkel collected stories, and Gausta sketched pictures. These two men had a few things in common. They were both born in Western Telemark, so they spoke the same dialect, and they were contemporaries, only a 2-year age difference. But their immigration history was not similar. Herbjørn immigrated when he was only 13 years old in 1867, while Torkel immigrated when he was 30 years old, almost 20 years later. And Torkel was a traveling salesman who interviewed folk in almost every Telemark settlement in the Midwest. Here he collected real-life stories of individuals' struggles and also their family lineage. He was very interested in people's stories, but it was fairly uncommon for him to publish humorous stories. Herbjørn was a serious and gifted painter. He was an insightful and creative genius who could depict feelings through body stature and facial expressions. And this is a drawing he has made of himself, typical of him at the easel with his pipe in his mouth. Now, Loran told a little bit about my connection to Telelaget, which was established in 1907. So Telelaget is a bygdelag, and the members would gather annually at various locations in the Midwest to celebrate their local customs, their dialects, and heritage. These gatherings were called stevnir. It was typical in the early 1900s that they would, at these stevnas, have speakers, singers, folk dancers, fiddling contests. Those fiddling contests were called kappleik. They would have plays, and of course, there was always time to reminisce and share stories. So at a 2-year Telelag stevna held in Glenwood in 1912, there were stories that were told, and also fairy tales shared. Torkel at some point has encouraged Gausta to illustrate the wonderful stories, rispur og sogor, that were told at the Glenwood stevna. These stories were published in Norwegian for the March 1919 issue of Telesoga. It is interesting to note here that the earliest 50 Telesog issues were all printed, published in Norwegian. So my translations of the Glenwood Tales, or the Rispur og Sogur, would lead to me to have an interesting and rewarding journey learning about the life of Herbjørn Gausta. The stories that Torkel shared with Herbjørn must have brought a special joy. His drawings to accompany these stories have certainly brought a smile to hundreds of readers of the 1919 issue and also the translation issue in 2017. There are many stories and 10 accompanying drawings in these issues. I'm going to share now with you 10 of these stories with Herbjørn's sketches. So these are from the Glenwood Tales. So here we see, this is an intimidating experience. A sick Norwegian farmer visits strict Dr. Hogue, who demands the farmer to take off your clothes. Piece by piece, the farmer is told to take off his clothes until he is naked. Ufta, so intimidating for a Norwegian. The second one is, we'll see a picture here of Pastor Hagen. The story goes, I'm going to actually read a couple excerpts of two pastors, but this here, first excerpt is about Pastor Hagen. Far west in North Dakota, I became acquainted with a young pastor whose name was Hagen. Hagen in Norwegian. He'd acquired land and was the pastor for the new settlers in the prairie. He was quite a nice guy, and he created a pleasant atmosphere in his home and also in his congregation. He was a likable fellow with a full and round face, and even rounder around the middle. When he was on the pulpit, he was called Bugenhagen. There were so many people around who had the name of Hagen, you know, and some keen boys who could give nicknames decided to change his name to Bugenhagen. They found a good reason to rename the big reformer from Luther's time. The second excerpt. Also, I remembered a pastor who was quite a different type. He was a telemarking and one of the most clever to preach. He was a pastor not too far from here, and what a good parish he had. A little piece of a kingdom, I would say, but he didn't take care of his kingdom. He had a sharp eye for a joke, and he criticized a little too often. He wrote rural news reports for the newspaper and wrote witty things about people. Even if it was harmless, people became angry. They figured out that it was the pastor who wrote it because of the way he was writing things, and they became mad. They didn't say anything directly to him, but if they walked past his house on the road, they would stand with a tight fist and shake it towards his house. How did it go with him? How did it go? It went with him as it did for the kings in Europe. He lost his kingdom. The third story is about a sick man who has to go to the hospital. I was so sick with stomach pain. I went to the doctor in Minneapolis, and he told me that I had to go to the hospital for surgery. He wrote the address of the hospital on a piece of paper so I could find my way. Yeah, I found the hospital. I walked in and sat down on a chair. I saw that it was a very large building, and many women walked back and forth. And these women had white aprons and caps. And they looked so sad and serious that I thought maybe I'd come to the wrong place. They were probably all maidens. So one of them came over to me and asked me what I wanted. Yeah, I should come to the hospital, I said, and I gave her the piece of paper that the doctor had given me. She took me in another room and took out a book and asked me my name. Anon Vik, I answered. Then she asked me what type of work I had. Oh, I'm a farmer, I replied. She then wrote it down in her book. Then she wanted to know what church I belonged to. I'm a synod man, I answered. This is a synod hospital, isn't it? No, she said. The Free Church runs this hospital. Yeah, so then I can't be here, I said. I want to be at the Synod Hospital with my own people who have the pure teachings. Then she looked at me seriously and said that it didn't make any difference what faith community you belong to. There are all types of people here, she said, and we all take care of you just as well, even though you are a synod man. Then the story goes on where he wants to see this hospital. She takes him around to every room. He gets to experience an elevator, which he had never experienced. But at the end of the story is a cute little excerpt. After his surgery, he's lying in bed and he says, I heard singing of hymns in another room. Is there a funeral here today? I asked. Have they finished off a synod man? No, she replied. They're singing for the sick people. Well, why didn't they sing for me? I asked. Instead of cutting a hole in my stomach, it just shows you are making a difference between people. That is not true, she said. Now that you have had your surgery, they will also come and sing for you also. This is interesting because it's telling a little bit about the faith of our immigrants and the early settlers in the Midwest and how they were so true to their synod, which was the evangelical church, of course, at that time. The fourth story is about a man named Sjur Fimreit. I will tell you about a Sogning person from the Sognefjord, of course, that I knew quite well. His name was Sjur Fimreit, and he came to America about 40 years ago and settled in southern Minnesota, where I am from. I can barely remember when he came. Sjur is from Fimreit in Sogn and still used his old name, which is well known for Norwegian sagas. When he had been there for a while, he decided he probably should get his citizenship papers. But the clerk of court did not understand Norwegian, or maybe he didn't want to understand it. And the problem was that Sjur couldn't speak any English. So a friend, Knut Olsen, came along to be a witness, and he also tried to help Sjur. But no matter how much the clerk tried to spell and write Fimreit, he didn't succeed. Why don't you call yourself Olsen like other Norwegians, the clerk asked. He wants you to be named Olsen, Knut told Sjur. Yeah, if I should be Olsen, so let me be called Olsen then, he answered. Okay, I'll write Olsen. I will write Olsen, the clerk replied. But what is your first name? He was unable to write Sjur as well. You can call me Hans, said Sjur. Yeah, that is a good name, said the clerk. I will write Hans Olsen, and that will be your American name. After that, Sjur Fimreit had the name Hans Olsen. Now, Sjur was a small man. He spoke the Sogn dialect so quickly that it ran out of him. He never used a razor, but he used a sheep shears that he trimmed his beard with. And in between his whiskers, the brown snuff ran down his chin. His hair looked like magpie nest. He couldn't understand why folk combed their hair every day. I comb my hair every Christmas. Yeah, and then I almost tear off my head, of course, he says. He was great also at chewing tobacco and spitting. In the space between his front teeth, he could spit a small stream of tobacco quite far. I think he could hit a nail head 2 times in a row. Yes, this is how Sjur looked. But in spite of this, he had managed to catch a wife and have children. And when he came to America, he got a farm also. Our next story, I'm not going to read any excerpts. I'm going to tell a little bit about this. But here we see Tom Rygg. He's offering a drink to the doctor who comes to visit his wife. He explains that he has the liquor bottle only because his wife has been sick, and he uses it only as a home remedy. Just notice there's a feather coming out of the bottle. I'm not quite sure what that's supposed to represent or why that's there, but it's an interesting drawing. Typical, I think, of a Norwegian farmer in his overalls, and typical of a doctor coming to visit. The next one is about Pastor Loftus, who meets Asla and Olav. I met Asla and Olav on the train from Bruton to Glenwood. I saw immediately that they had been drinking. They were having fun and were noisy. They were swearing, and they took chewing tobacco, and they tried to talk English, and they drank sporadically from a bottle. I think you can see the bottle off there on the right. If they continue in this way, they will be drunk, I thought, so I went over to them. It is terrible how you are behaving, I said. Those who are Norwegian folks should be ashamed and not behave like animals. But who in the world are you? Olav asked. It makes no difference who I am, I said, but I know well your pastor, and I know he would be mad at you if he knew how you were behaving. Then Asla was so surprised that he almost fell off the bench. He says he's a brother to Tola also. For God's sake, do you know Tolo? Yes, I answered, I am his brother. Oh no, what a miracle, Olav replied. Who would have thought that we should meet such a man here? Yeah, so you are Tolo's brother. Yeah, you look a little bit like him also. But where are you going today? Oh, I said, the pastor in Glenwood is sick and he wants me to preach for him. Yeah, so you are a pastor? Olav said. I sure didn't know that Tolo had a brother who was a pastor. Oh, then Asla woke up. What are you talking about? Asla said. It is something quite bad, Olav replied. So bad that I can't talk about it. He says he's a brother of Tolo's. No, now I've never heard anything so terrible in my lifetime, Asla declared. Do you belong then to the synod? He asked. Yes, I said, and now I want to know, who is responsible for this boozing? Because the person who is responsible will have to answer for it sometime. Yeah, now you heard it, Olav, Asla said. Now you will regret. Anyway, the story ends with them arriving and the conductor yelling, Glenwood! So they must be on their way to the Glenwood Stevna. The next story is a very short story, and it's a simple drawing of Anlaug. This, I would say, is one of his simpler sketches, but is an interesting little story of the logic of Anlaug. She says, you talk about hard times, said Anlaug, but when I came to America, that was hard times. First the grasshoppers came, and then came the wheat fungus, and after that I came. The next one is a fairy tale. I was born in Øyfjell, he said, and I came to America when I was 6 years old. They told so many fairy tales and sagas at home, and I still remember some of them. There was a mill house, I think it was in Driverbekken, which is a creek. There were so many trolls there in olden days, so many people dared not go there in the night to grind. However, Knut Brennup, brenn means to burn, by the way, and brennup to burn up. However, Knut Brennup came and he wanted to grind. Yes, if you dare, you can come on Thursday evening, the owner said, and I will even give you a bushel of wheat. Yeah, so Knut was tempted. He took along a tar pot and went to the mill that evening and hung it in the fireplace and began to cook the tar. Later in the evening, there was a call from over by the hill. Knut, burn up, the voice said. You burn up, Knut answered. Come here, the voice said. You come here, Knut replied. Then the troll came with a rumbling and crashing noise, tore open the door and stuck his head in. Look at my nose, how long it is, the troll said. Feel the tar, how hot it is, Knut said. And then he reached down in the cooking tar pot and smeared the tar on his nose. The troll then ran away, and soon after he heard trolls laughing heartily up in the hill. So there was a smart Knut who was prepared to meet the troll in this story. The next one is a story about death. This is Gauta and Neri Nevestol. It went with Gauta as it does with other folk. He died. There was an old bachelor, Neri Nevestol, who arranged for the funeral for Gauta. When the day came that Gauta should be buried, the pastor came in his liturgical gown and book under his arm. After him came the women and others who were going to show their respect. When they came into Gauta's house, they saw quite a scene. The corpse lay on a bench in the middle of the floor, and the old man Neri stood astride over Gauta and was shaving him with a type of homemade farmer's knife. He held out to both ends of the knife and scraped with all his might. "These whiskers are so tough," said Neri, "but I will be done soon." Yeah, they finally got Gauta in the coffin. They sang and they read, and then Gauta should be buried. Neri drove the wagon with the coffin, and the pastor and the others walked behind because it wasn't far to go. And I am intrigued by that last one because I think Herbjørn has really captured the story with that drawing. But my favorite is the one coming next. It's my favorite drawing of all of them. This is a story here about Sigrid and Tarjei, who meet at a Telelaget stevne. Two elderly people from Telemark, Tarjei and Sigrid, they meet at a Telelaget stevne. They had come to America over 30 years earlier and were from the same village. They had not seen each other since they were in Norway. At that time, he was an agile young bachelor, and she was a young, slender girl. Now time, as might be expected, had left its mark on them and made them quite unrecognizable. She was a little round, well-fed farm wife, and he was a tall and skinny man with a long, white, stringy beard. When mutual friends brought them together, Tarjei said, "No, this cannot be Sigrid. You look like an anthill." She replied, "And you look like an old billy goat," she said. I think Herbjørn has really captured these two characters in this drawing. It's quite amazing what Herbjørn could do to these stories and make them come alive. I think the stories in themselves are humorous and fun, but the drawings really add so much. And as you see, these stories have really brought out the humorous side of Herbjørn's creative talent also. We can't think of him as just a serious painter. He has had fun, I'm sure, doing these. So now I need to tell a little bit about how it ended with Herbjørn Gausta. After suffering a stroke, Gausta died 2 months later at the Deaconess Hospital in Minneapolis on May 22nd, 1924. He was buried near his father, mother, and sisters in the Greenfield Cemetery in Harmony, Minnesota. 3 years after his death, a 16-foot granite monument funded and erected by Telelaget was erected on May 18th, 1927. And if you look at the picture of the people, you will notice there, yes, watch the arrow, that is Torkel Ofterli right there. And he was instrumental in gathering money to have this monument erected. So this is on I would say the south side of Harmony, the cemetery. If you follow through the city of Harmony or the town of Harmony, the Greenfield Cemetery is on the left of the road after you've driven through Harmony. So this is the end of my presentation, but I just have to share with you that I have not done this alone. I have had great resource friends to help me with my research. First, I want to thank Alice Kern. She was the editor of the Telesoga who encouraged me to do the translations. She was a huge support and a cheerleader for me. I also want to thank Sharon Storhoff from Harmony, Minnesota, who shared many Gausta letters and important information about the Gausta family. And last but not least, Harold Omnes, one of Telelaget's liaisons. He's from Lunde in Telemark, and he helped me with proofreading the translations I did for this Glenwood Tales. And I'm very grateful. I'm so happy to be invited by Lorraine Gilbertson and Vesterheim to share our Gausta story with you. And so happy that you're keeping his memory alive by having this presentation, but more so for your exhibit coming up. And I'm sure Lorraine will tell more about that. So thank you so much for inviting me and being able to be a part of this. Lorraine, did you have any questions that you needed to ask me?
Yes. Well, let me bring back that last slide. Sorry about that. We had a slide to show, sorry, the mouse is suddenly not cooperating. The last image here, we had a slide because one of the questions might be, is that copy of the translated Glenwood Tales still available?
Yes, Telelaget has a storage of extra copies. Now, if there's a huge request for this issue of the Telesoga from May 2017, we would probably have to republish, and that is not a problem either. But it's a wonderful issue because it's a biography of him. It's an article about his altar paintings. It's also a little bit about his other paintings, and of course, the Glenwood Tales. So it's really, this whole issue is dedicated to Herbjørn Gausta. And this was also Alan Kern's idea, to have a special issue in honor of him, in memory of Herbjørn.
Wonderful. And I've got now on the screen that the image of that issue, as well as the website for Telelaget of America. People can go there to get a copy.
Right. Great.
You grew up in Lanesboro, Minnesota, really not very far from Harmony, where Gausta and his family lived. Had you ever heard of him before you were active in Telelaget?
No, and it's just amazing that I'd never heard of him. And to think that in my own community, in neighboring churches, his altar paintings are in these churches. And then it brings to mind how many paintings, maybe 400 paintings, and how many thousands of people have sat in church looking at his altar paintings and not even known his name, not known or been interested in finding out who this artist is. So he was quite prolific, and I'm very honored to be able to even speak about him.
Well, it's wonderful to share another dimension. Some people might be familiar with him as a painter of altar paintings, but there's so much more to him, and I'm so pleased that you could share a little bit about his more humorous work.
Yes.
In Vesterheim's collection, we have a number of his paintings. We have sketchbooks, but we also have some wonderful photographs, and I wondered if you could comment on those.
I think the top one, I think we visited a little bit about this. This is from Fillmore County, which is the county where I grew up, and in Harmony. Also, and one of those women there is, I think, one of his sisters.
I think the one on the right. I'm not sure which sister, but... Okay.
Yeah, he had 3 sisters that came over, and I think one of them stayed on the farm. One got married soon after she arrived. So, and the one below is very typical of a farm in Telemark. Now, this is from Rauland, which is in western Telemark. That's where Herbjørn's mother was raised. And when she got married, she moved then from Rauland, she moved east over to the Vestfjorddalen, to the Gausta farm. But Herbjørn, when he would go back to Telemark all those different times, most of the time went back to Rauland, to his family, extended family there.
Well, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
To have that connection to identify these places. And could you say anything more about why there are so many photographs of scenes that also happen to match paintings?
Yes, because later in life, after the camera was, of course, more common, Herbjørn took many photos. When he traveled to Norway or to Telemark, he'd take photos, and then those were like his, instead of sketches, which he had done earlier in life, he took the photos back to America and would then paint the scenes. So he used them as his sketches, these photos from Telemark.
Well, they're wonderful, and they're even wonderful by themselves for all the details that you can see.
Yes. I love that farm scene from Rauland Telemark. It's just absolutely wonderful. Very typical. Yes.
And if folks would like to see more of Vesterheim's collection, one option is to visit our website, vesterheim.org, and there is virtual galleries. You can reach this by typing in collections.vesterheim.org/Vesterheim archives/virtual galleries, which is a lot, or you can just go to our website, and up on top where you see collections and research, click there, go to the bottom, and you can visit these virtual galleries. It's not the entire collection, but it's a selection of some of our many nice pieces, and it includes some of the paintings as well as some of these preparatory photos by Herbjørn Gausta. And so here's just one of the artworks that you can have a closer look at. You can read a little bit about him and this specific item, and then you can click on the photo and see better views of it. There are only about 15 items if you search by Gausta right now, but we're always adding more, so do check back again. The exhibition Vesterheim has had of Herbjørn Gausta artworks opened in April of 2023, and it will close on May 12th, 2024. So even if you don't make it during the run of the exhibition, we hope you'll have a look here on virtual galleries for some of the collection. And thank you so much, Elaine, for joining us and telling us more about Herbjørn Gausta and his Glenwood Tales. This has been just fascinating.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.